It's go time, all right? Time to start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the campus of Rose State College in our F&B Bank ballroom from the student union. We're glad to have you here for tonight's candidate forum between the Libertarian Party candidates that will be on the Oklahoma primary ballot. We want to thank a few people for helping us out here at the campus, Anita Poole-Inslee and John Shackelford, and really the entire event services team that got everything set up, have the live stream going as well. So we want to thank them. By the way, my name is James Davenport. I'm the Associate Dean for Social Sciences here at Rose State College. This is my colleague, Dr. Emily Stacy, our political science program coordinator for Rose State. We are very excited to have you all here with us. And we want to take just a quick moment. In addition to our daytime jobs, we also are the co-hosts of the podcast.
Yeah, Not My Generation. So in front of you directly, you have a lovely flyer with QR codes for you to scan to your streaming platform of choice. Please see the Not My Generation QR codes, and we talk about various political events from a hyper-local to international level in our different generational voices. So obviously James is a very proud, self-proclaimed libertarian, so you guys can get excited about this.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Get excited, man.
Absolutely.
Right? We're right. So I was pleased you guys get excited about this. And obviously in the Gen X category of
That's
things.
right. That's right.
And I refer to myself as a libertarian, and I'm a millennial. So we kind of look at things from our different perspectives.
Yep.
So please do check out our podcast, a little shameless self-promotion.
There you go. There you go. All right, so tonight we're here to hear from candidates from the Libertarian Party who are running for president. The two individuals that we have tonight, as I mentioned earlier, are going to be on the ballot in Oklahoma come next month when we hold our primary elections. And so we are very pleased to give you an opportunity to hear from them. We very much are proponents that choice matters in elections.
Yes.
And that we should not be constrained by the binary of Republican and Democrat. And so we're very excited to get this opportunity to hear from other candidates running for office. I'm going to introduce one of the candidates. Once I do that, if you want to come up on stage and take a seat, then Emily will introduce the other. Then we'll introduce tonight's moderator. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mr. Chase Oliver, who was dubbed the most influential libertarian in America by the Rolling Stone due to his presence in the Georgia Senate race of 2022. Mr. Oliver began his political activism by opposing the Iraq War during the former President George W. Bush's administration. He discovered the Libertarian Party when he stopped by a booth at an Atlanta Pride Festival in 2010. In 2020, Mr. Oliver ran for Congress in Georgia's 5th District race, in a race to complete the term of the late civil rights icon John Lewis. And in 2020, he ran for U.S. Senate, as I mentioned, versus Senator Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. I think we all remember that race. Oliver was widely credited with causing the runoff between Senator Warnock and Mr. Walker. And Mr. Oliver has been an advocate of ranked choice voting in order to avoid the need for runoffs in the future. Mr. Oliver announced his exploratory committee for the presidency in December of 2022 and has since been traveling across the country to connect with voters. He has appeared on PBS, CNN, Fox Business News, C-SPAN, and Reason TV, and has also been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Bloomberg Magazine, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, The Guardian, and Rolling Stone. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Chase Oliver.
Very impressive. I get the pleasure of introducing Mr. Jacob Hornberger, who was born in Laredo, Texas, and raised on a farm on the Rio Grande River. We will forgive you, as we are Oklahomans, my friend. It's a little painful, but it's okay. He earned a bachelor's degree in economics from the Virginia Military Institute, where he was valedictorian of his graduating class. Upon graduating from VMI, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army and served in in the Army Reserves from 1972 to 1980. During this time, Mr. Hornberger earned his Juris Doctorate from the University of Texas School of Law.
Did we mention we were in Oklahoma?
I know, right? I'm trying not to do horns, man. I'm really trying hard. Especially after that Houston game. Anyway, his working career has spanned the law profession, including working for the Laredo Legal Aid Society, which provided free legal assistance to the poor, as well as founding his own law firm in Dallas, Texas. He has helped teach future lawyers as an adjunct professor, we love that, of law at the University of Dallas. Jacob has also worked for the Foundation of Economic Education, and in 1989 founded the Future of Freedom Foundation, whose mission is to present the principled case for the libertarian philosophy. Mr. Hornberger served 3 terms on the Libertarian Party Platform Committee during the 1990s and has run for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination in both 2000 and in 2020. He also ran as an independent candidate for the United States Senate in Virginia, where he garnered 7% of the general election vote. Pretty impressive. Mr. Hornberger lives in Broadlands, Virginia, and in his free time enjoys cycling, hiking, and is also a Gold Life Master in Duplicate Bridge. Also impressive. Please welcome Mr. Jacob Hornberger. Thank you for being here.
All right. Tonight's moderator is no stranger to Oklahoma Libertarians. Mr. Chris Powell has served as the chair of the Libertarian Party on multiple occasions. He has run for governor and lieutenant governor in our state. He also ran for Oklahoma County clerk and garnered a very large percentage of that vote as a Libertarian. 36% in that for Oklahoma County clerk. He currently serves as one of the growing number of Libertarian elected officials in Oklahoma as a member of the Bethany City Council. Chris is also frequently interviewed by various media and requested to represent the Libertarian Party or Libertarian philosophy at various events around Oklahoma. So I'm pleased to welcome tonight's moderator, Mr. Chris Powell.
All right. So thank you to Dr. Stacy and Dr. Davenport for that wonderful introduction, and to you and Rose State for hosting this forum for the candidates in the historic first Libertarian presidential primary in Oklahoma, as well as to all of you in the audience for attending, along with those watching online, and special thanks to all the people who signed the petitions to get these candidates on our ballot. Oklahoma voters who are registered Libertarian will be able to participate in the primary on Super Tuesday, March 5th. The deadline to change your party affiliation to Libertarian to be able to do so is February 9th, and you may do that online at okvoterportal.okelections.us. So if you're not registered Libertarian now, get that done this evening or tomorrow or Friday so that you can vote in our primary on Super Tuesday. You may also be able to register for the first time at that website if you need to do that. And you may find out more about the Oklahoma Libertarian Party at oklp.org, including information about our state convention coming up March 1st through 3rd, right here in Oklahoma City. We'll have Spike Cohen and Dr. Mary Ruert as guest speakers at that. It will be a wonderful event, and I would certainly hope to see as many of you as possible there. Our program for this evening is intended to allow our candidates to present themselves to Oklahoma voters with discussion focused on what they believe they and the Libertarian Party can accomplish and their ideas about how to do that. Allow me to quickly go over the rules. Each candidate will get 3 minutes for an opening statement as well as a closing statement. We've determined that Mr. Hornberger will go first, and after the opening statements, I will provide questions to which the candidates will have 2 minutes to respond, taking turns going first to do so. Our timer, Ashley Blevins, will be here in the front and will hold up a yellow paper to signal 30 seconds remaining and a red paper to signal 5 seconds remaining. Additional responses to the other candidate or follow-ups for clarification, if any, will be at my discretion. With that, let us begin with our opening statements. And Mr. Hornberger, if you will go ahead, you have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for Rose State University, and thank you all for attending, and especially the students here from this college. You know, the civil rights leader Martin Luther King once pointed out that the U.S. government is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And nobody can really deny that that's true. Invasions, occupations, wars of aggression, sanctions, embargoes, assassinations. Democrats and Republicans have forced it upon us, a veritable federal killing machine. And then here at home, they've also forced it on us, one of the most crooked, corrupt, and violent programs and failed programs in U.S. history, the war on drugs. That has brought untold misery to people, and, by the way, also happens to be the most racist government program since segregation, given the fact that blacks receive much higher jail sentences than whites do for drug offenses. Democrats and Republicans have forced it upon us an immigration control system that is based on the socialist principle of central planning on the border, which is the cause of the perpetual and permanent crisis, death, suffering, kidnappings, rapes, and massive police state that enforces this totally dysfunctional system, including a Berlin Wall and concertina wire that is designed to cut people up. We also live under a system of, really is a cesspool of socialism, with Social Security and Medicare being the favorite socialist programs of Democrats and Republicans, that has destroyed people's faith in themselves and their families and in charitable activity. We live under a system where the Federal Reserve has debauched our currency. And when you add all this up, you get out of control federal spending, $34 trillion in debt, $60 trillion in unfunded liabilities, and monetary debauchery decade after decade through inflation and recessions, thanks to the Federal Reserve. Now, it's tempting to think that, oh, well, what we really need here at this point is some cyanide capsules, because these people, Democrats and Republicans, have done such a horrific job in what they've done with this country. And there are, of course, a record number of suicides in this country. People are checking out. But there's no reason for that, because there's a way out. And that way out is the most glorious philosophy that mankind has ever conceived, the libertarian philosophy. That is the way out of every single one of these crises. I want America to lead the world to the greatest reaches of freedom, peace, prosperity, and harmony in the history of mankind, and that's why I'm seeking the nomination of this party. Thank you very much.
I want to join Jacob in saying thank you to Rose State College for having us out here today. My name is Chase Oliver, and I do want to be the Libertarian candidate for president. Now, why do I want to be that candidate? Because enough Americans know they're sick and tired of a two-party system that they know is broken. They feel deep in their bones that something is wrong, and that the people who have been elected to lead this country are not doing their job. They're actually further controlling us and taking more and more freedom away from us, which is in stark contrast to the dream of our founders. So why am I running for office? Because I believe we need to have a new generational wake-up. Because I'm ready to run against two 80-year-old politicians who represent 20th century politics, the Cold War mindset. My generation came about in the War on Terror. That's how I got started in politics. Because I saw my friends getting sent to go fight wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that I knew many times were based on lies. Lies told by our government to facilitate violence around the world. And because of that, I didn't know there was a Libertarian Party. I was a Democrat for a while, until Barack Obama got elected. And he said, we're going to end the wars, we're going to stop the drones, we're going to close Gitmo, we're going to talk to our enemies. And he abandoned every single one of those promises. And because of that, I abandoned the Democratic Party, and I found the Libertarian Party. And because I happened to be wandering around, I found them at a festival, and they said, what is the most important thing to you? I bet you're a Libertarian. And I said, I oppose the war on terror and the war in Iraq with every fiber of my being. And they said, welcome home. That's the kind of campaign I want to run across America. because so many people know that there's something wrong. They see the problems with government. They see that the government is too big, too abusive, too intrusive. And we have to provide solutions that get the government out of their lives, lower the impact, get rid of the taxes, and frankly, send the message that if you are a peaceful person, you're not committing force, fraud, violence, theft, or coercion. Your life is your life, your body is your body, your property is your property, and your business is your business, and none of the government's. And that's the message we can send out to millions of Americans who are looking for a message deep in their bones that is something they know is different than what Republicans and Democrats have given us our entire lives. I'm ready to be that messenger. I'm a tried and true candidate. I've knocked on thousands of doors. I've made national news for the Libertarian Party when I forced the runoff with Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. And I'm ready to do that in every state across the country. We're a lean, mean campaign. We have hundreds of volunteers, and the metrics of this campaign speak for itself. We've gotten the most donations from supporters. We have the most number of volunteers. We've traveled the most number of miles, and we're ready to be that campaign across all 50 states. I want each of you to listen to us tonight, and I hope you like what you hear, because the message of liberty is a great one. And I hope you can join this campaign by going to votechaseoliver.com and getting involved. And I welcome your vote, and I welcome you to get involved in your primary in just a few weeks. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we can move on to the questions. If either of you gentlemen would like to stand while you're answering, you're certainly welcome to do that. If you want to sit, you can sit, whatever makes you comfortable. But let's get to the first question here. In broad terms, how do you describe what it means to be a libertarian, and why should voters see it as beneficial to support libertarians? And we'll start with Mr. Oliver. 2 minutes.
So when people ask me what is a libertarian, the first thing I say is we're people who look for the absence of force to solve the problems in our country. And who has a monopoly on force? The government. The first thing we look for is peaceful solutions that don't involve the government getting involved in our lives. And broadly speaking, we're people that believe, as I said, your body is your body, your life is your life, your business is your business, your property is your property, so long as you're not committing force, fraud, coercion, or theft, or violence against another person. That's the only legitimate use for government, in my opinion, is if your liberty is being infringed upon another. That's why we have courts and police and a military that should be protecting us from invasion, not fighting in wars around the world. But broadly speaking, the message of liberty is one of freedom, of one that says that you don't need authority to control you because you are your own authority. Most local government is yourself, your self-governance. And broadly speaking, we believe in the decentralization of power. I ask people all the time if they're a parent, and that they have unconditional love for their kids, they know their kids, and they're going to be the best advocate for them. So why do we take power out of their hands and put it in the hands of central planners in Washington, D.C. or state houses? It doesn't make any sense that we take power out of the very hands of the people who have the most control and most authority over themselves, ourselves, our families, and that's what we seek to put government back to the individual, back to the local communities, and away from the centralized power structure, which has plagued our economy in this world for a long time. That's called socialism and communism. We stand in stark contrast to those political philosophies, which are based inherently on the use of violence and the use of the state to try to fulfill their needs. I believe there's a better option for that. I think the libertarian message is one that speaks to that freedom is always better than control, and we are anti-authority and pro-freedom.
Mr. Hornberger, 2 minutes with the same question. Do you need to hear that again?
No, it's fine. Libertarianism is a philosophy of freedom. But the problem is that a lot of people think they're free. I did before I discovered libertarianism, and it was pure libertarian principles that helped me to break through this indoctrination that I had suffered from first grade. And I realized I don't live the life of a free person. And it was at that moment that I said I want to devote my life to freedom, to see what it's like to be a free person. But secondly, like I said in my opening statement, this is the way to get out of all these crises here. If you look at the immigration crisis, it's been going on all my life. I grew up on the border. I lived almost half my life there. There's only one solution. I've been saying this for 30 years. I co-edited a book 30 years ago called The Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration. The only solution is open borders. Dismantle this entire socialist system and have free flows of people across borders. It's the only solution. Now, take inflation. What's the solution? Get government out of the money field. Totally, a free market monetary system, just like the Libertarian Nobel Prize winning economist Friedrich Hayek called for. A separation of money in the state. Take Medicare. Medicare and Medicaid destroyed the finest healthcare system in history. That's what we had. When I was a kid growing up in Laredo, Texas, nobody had major medical insurance. This was before Medicare because healthcare costs were low and stable. It was like going to the grocery store. And then Medicare and Medicaid comes in, and that's what destroys this whole system. Doctors' offices were filled in Laredo. Half of the patients could never pay, and the doctors knew it. But doctors never turned away anyone because they felt it was their moral duty to do this. That's what I want to restore to America, that freedom, that faith in freedom and free markets on which this country was built and founded.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to our next question, which is, considering the stiff competition for the party nomination, not to mention the long odds of winning the general election, how are you seeking to make your campaign efforts worthwhile regardless of the outcome of the race? And we'll start with Mr. Hornberger.
Well, for me, libertarian principles are everything. I mean, I think it's our job to raise people's vision to what a genuinely free society is. And you break through this wall of indoctrination with pure principles. If people are never exposed to libertarian ideas, how are they supposed to think about it? Now, there's been a tendency in our party to water down the principles, to try to please voters, to try to get down on their level. I think that's a horrible mistake. We need to stand tall for our principles regardless of the reaction. And we need to make the case for freedom in a very passionate, eloquent way. Let me give you an example of this. That if we lived in 1855 Alabama or Georgia or Florida, there would have been people saying we need to reform slavery. You know, fewer lashings, better work conditions, more food. My position, bull on that reform. We need to make the case for abolition of slavery because it's wrong, regardless of what the voters think, regardless that we're going against the stream. That's our job as libertarians, to raise that bar to what liberty really is. And there would have been people, undoubtedly, there were people, saying you can't free the slaves all at once. It would be cruel and inhumane, Jacob. They don't have job skills, they don't have money, they don't have dwellings. We need to phase out slavery over 25 years. Well, I guarantee you that wouldn't have been the position of slaves. They would have said, we don't have any money, we don't have job skills, we will manage without Social Security, Medicare, government assistance. We want our freedom. And that's what we need to do with the whole welfare state. We need to make the case for dismantling this entire system because that's what freedom is all about.
Same question to you, Mr. Oliver. Do you need to hear that again?
Feel free to repeat the question.
Considering the stiff competition for the party nomination, not to mention the long odds of winning the general election, how are you seeking to make your campaign efforts worthwhile regardless of the outcome of the race?
Yeah. So the point of the question is I believe you're very correct, right? The chances of a libertarian winning the White House in 2024, maybe there's a multiverse where that happens. I don't know if that's where we're living right now. But there's a lot of other ways we can actually win if we support libertarians. Winning outright is not the only metric of victory. I have 4 others. How many states can this campaign help or retain ballot access in states so it makes it easier for libertarians to run for office so we can get more good libertarians in the ballot for you to choose for? How many states can we win or retain major party status like they earned in Iowa, which allowed me to speak on the Iowa soapbox stage right alongside the Republican and Democratic candidates as the first candidate for president who isn't a Republican or Democrat to be able to do that. That was thanks to the hard work of LP Iowa earning major party status. I want to help other states earn that very major party status. How many winnable, electable, libertarian races can we identify? Just like Chris Powell right here. We want to find races just like his so we can put the media spotlight and knock on those doors and help get the support we need to help elect those people. And lastly, I have an aim to double our party's membership, which is something that every time we run for president, it happens. But here's the kicker. I want to maintain those numbers for the next 4 years, so our next candidate for president has twice as many door knockers, twice as many activists, twice as much of the donor base ready to get the win in their sales for 2028. So we can grow this party to win in 2028 and beyond. That is what we're trying to build here with this campaign, a foundation for future libertarians to run on. So that way we can grow our party in a way that's organic, right from the grassroots. That's the work I'm devoted to doing in this party. I would love to win the White House and start dismantling the state on day one. Any libertarian would love to do that. But what I'm ready to do right now is put in the work and make sure that we do have a future libertarian president and future libertarian members of Congress and look at libertarians all over the country. Thank you.
Moving on to our next question here. Should you become the Libertarian Party nominee, what will be your focus in the general election to maximize your impact with the general public in a way that is positive for the Libertarian Party? We'll start with Mr. Oliver, 2 minutes.
So I think first you have to do is you have to listen to the voters. That's the first thing you have to do, is get out and hear what's important to them. If you look at polling, the top 4 topics out there is the economy, which we have to speak to. We have to speak to balance in the budget, stop printing trillions of dollars out of thin air that's watering down each and every person's wealth through the hidden tax known as inflation. It's part of ending the Federal Reserve and a lot of these other things. But first and foremost, we have to get the spending under control. Second is immigration. It's a huge crisis at our southern border, but it's not a crisis that's created by immigrants. It's a crisis created by government failures to actually let people who are peaceful come in here and work. There are so many people who just want to work. I was just in El Paso recently. I spoke to business owners who were desperate to hire immigrants who wanted to come to this country. But because of the broken immigration system, the way the asylum courts work, all the failures, it takes them months or years to even get their court date. And in that time, they cannot work. And what are they doing? They're stuck on the public dole and on the help from local citizens who are stretched thin. We need to fix this crisis. Next is healthcare. We do have to lower healthcare costs by providing alternatives to the broken system that is known as Obamacare. I was a waiter, and I'm sure I was insured under Obamacare with a $10,000 deductible that I would never meet, that I still had to pay for. That's a failure from government. We need to provide free market solutions that are going to lower the cost of healthcare. And lastly is education. Parents across this country during the COVID crisis saw the failures of public education right through a Zoom screen, just like you're watching this debate right now if you're watching on Zoom. They saw those failures and they want better options for their kids. And we have to dismantle the public school system and work our way towards full school choice. And by that, I mean fully voluntarily funded school choice that allows people to choose the school they want to go to and send their kids there. Because they, like I said earlier, they know their kids better than the central planners in DC. Thank you.
All right, same question, Mr. Hornberger. Do you need that repeated?
No, it's fine. There's a reason why totalitarian dictators shut down meetings like this. They know that of the power of ideas, especially ideas on liberty. They try to shut people like us down. If ideas on liberty capture the hearts and minds of the American people, there's no telling what can happen. But in order to do that, to ignite a revolution out there, we need to fight with our principles. That's what we need to take to the American people. One of the priorities is what I talked about in my opening statement. This national security state is the worst mistake America ever made, was to convert the federal government to a national security state, the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA. We need to restore a limited government republic. That was our founding governmental system, with just a basic military force. Because this entity has destroyed our rights and our freedoms. Imagine living under a government that has the power to assassinate you, to torture you, to detain you forever without any Bill of Rights protection whatsoever. And then we need to take people's vision to a higher level in this whole socialist welfare state. Now people say, libertarians say, oh Jacob, there's going to be adverse reaction among voters, you're not going to accept those things. You never know that. But we're like Johnny Appleseed. We need to plant the seeds for liberty for them to germinate in people's minds. If we water down our principles, we get nowhere. I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago in one of our debates, presidential debates, a guy came up to me afterward and he said, Jacob, I've been a proponent of government-controlled borders all my life. After this debate, you have opened my eyes. I am now in your camp. I'm a proponent of open borders. Very gratifying. That's what we can do with principles all across this country. And if that lights fire within the hearts and minds of the American people, we're looking at major change toward liberty in our land.
All right, so with that, we'll move to our next question. What issue do you believe a libertarian perspective would be received by the general public to best benefit in the context of a presidential campaign? And again, we'll start with Mr. Hornberger, 2 minutes.
Okay, there's no question about the fact that we have a radical philosophy that is very different from Democrats and Republicans and mainstream Americans. But if you magically teleported us to, let's say, 1880 America, it would be our philosophy that would be perfectly normal, and their philosophy would be radical. So there's no question that most of our positions shock average Americans, and they need time to process them, like even libertarians do when they first discovered libertarianism. But the position that I think would garner the support of 80-90% of the American people is our position on sound money. I think people know that this inflationary system is not beneficial to America, and it's not necessary, and that it's rooted. More people are figuring out it's not the stores that are raising their prices, it's the Federal Reserve debasement of the currency, and they're figuring that out. And I think that this position of sound money, whether restoring, the gold coin, silver coin standard that Franklin Roosevelt ended with his nationalization of gold that was totally unconstitutional, his institution of a paper money system, which I consider the second best monetary system, or the best monetary system, a total separation of money and the state, as the Nobel laureate Friedrich Hayek called for. I think Americans would jump at this, because who's not feeling the effects of rising prices there at the grocery store, and used cars and clothing, college expenses, healthcare expenses? And I think this is the one position that I think most Americans can gather around and say, we will support you libertarians on this one.
Same question, Mr. Oliver. Would you like to hear that question again?
No, and I hate to repeat some of the same things, but I do believe economic issues are quite important, and I think that would probably be the number one issue. And you spoke about Bastiat saying Hayek separating from this money in the state, right? We have that option right now in Bitcoin. That's something that we need to be pushing out there. That is a true separation of your money from the state. And as Jacob said, I would like to return our money back to being backed by something that's valuable. Gold, silver, I say you can use saffron if you want to, just whatever you want, as long as it's pegged to something that has some sort of intrinsic value. Let's get our money back to sound money. But to speak to your point, as you said, some of our positions are quite extreme, and they might shock people. But the truth is that we are the people who carve out the path of mainstream political opinion many times. When our party was founded in 1971, we were virulently anti-war. And we joined the anti-war movement that already existed in this country, but we joined it from the position of freedom from the national security state. When we started this party in 1971, we were pro-LGBTQ. We said, it doesn't matter who you love, the government should treat you the same when you have an interaction with the government. And lo and behold, 50 years later, the mainstream political opinion follows us. When we look at the war on drugs, the fact that cannabis is legal in most states these days for adults to consume, that's because somebody said we need to legalize all drugs 50 years ago and continues to say this now. So when we see a river, right, before that, there's a creek or a stream that carves that path. Our philosophy is what carves that path that the mainstream of political opinion follows 50 years from now. So we cannot shy away from those positions. We have to continue to shock the American public. Because if we do, enough people wake up and we tear down walls of authoritarianism. We've done it before, and we can do it again.
All right, so moving on to the next question. This is a little wordy, so if I need to repeat it, just say the word. Many people have at least some agreement with libertarian policy approaches, but have trepidation regarding what they may view as dramatic reversals of how government currently operates. What methods or attitudes would you advocate to increase optimism about the success of implementing proposals to increase individual liberty? Mr. Oliver, 2 minutes.
So I would do a lot of the same things that made me a libertarian to begin with. Like I said, I started out in politics being an anti-war Democrat. Now, I was a gun-loving Democrat, a tax-hating Democrat, a free market-loving Democrat. But aside from all that, I was a Democrat in name only. And it was because of my anti-war position that I found the Libertarian Party. I just happened to come across the booth at the Atlanta Pride Festival, and John Mons, who's a guy running for governor, brought me in, and he said, what is your most important political position? And I bet it relates back to libertarianism. And I said, I oppose the war in Iraq and the war on terror with every fiber of my being. And the next words out of his mouth were, welcome home. This is where you belong. He didn't gatekeep me about, what do you believe about this subject? What do you believe about that subject? He said, you know what, come here in this tent and talk with us libertarians about your anti-war positions. And I bet we can tie it to our position of liberty, our philosophy of liberty, and let you see what you've really been all along as somebody who wants freedom in your life. And that's the kind of welcoming person I want to be to this campaign. I want to be like a revival tent out, I'm from Georgia, so we have a lot of revivals. But I want to put those tents down. I want to speak outward to the people. And I want to let them know that they're welcome to come in this church. Sit down and hear the message of liberty. If you believe that immigrants are being abused, welcome home. If you believe that your property is being abused by the state, welcome home. If you're tired of seeing our wars overseas killing so many innocent people, welcome home. Whatever your liberty position is, we want you to come in the tent and learn to grow into liberty, grow into this philosophy, because that's how we build a movement that lasts. We cannot gate people at the voter box. We have to allow people to come in and grow into liberty, because nobody was a perfect libertarian on day one. So we need to allow that grace, that common grace for everyone to grow into liberty.
Mr. Hornberger, the same question to you. Would you like me to repeat that? Many people have at least some agreement with libertarian policy approaches, but have trepidation regarding what they may view as dramatic reversals of how government currently operates. What methods or attitudes would you advocate to increase optimism about the success of implementing proposals to increase individual liberty?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's what we were talking about here, that I think middle-class Americans and upper-middle-class and wealthy people have a very difficult time accepting our philosophy because they're comfortable. This is a radical philosophy. We're talking about major transformations in systems here. And, I'm sorry?
Just a little closer, yeah.
Okay. We're talking about a major transformation of systems here, like inflation. Okay, middle-class people, they have to adjust like everybody else, but they knock out a couple of movies or vacation here and there. They're much more reluctant to go with our whole package. And so I've often argued, for years I've argued in the Libertarian Party, that what we need to do is concentrate on the people who are really being victimized by this system. You take blacks. Every black in America knows that this drug war is racist. There's a book out, academic book by an academician named Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow. Every black I've ever talked to knows it, and the new Jim Crow is the drug war. And we need to be reaching out to them and saying, look, we want to get rid of this new Jim Crow. Hispanics. I don't think there's one Hispanic in this country that isn't horrified by what's going on the border. They just don't know that there's an alternative. They're looking for leadership. And we can provide that leadership because we do have a viable alternative. Open borders. And when they hear that, they will leap at it. That's all they're waiting for. We got people, 50% of people don't vote. That's a big market for us. Why are they not voting? Because they know it's a whole crooked, corrupt system. You can vote for Biden or Trump and it doesn't make one dime's worth of difference. But when they see us wanting to dismantle this welfare state and warfare state and the drug war and all this other apparatus, I have no doubt that a large percentage of them will raise their eyebrows and say, I'm going to go vote, and I'm going to go vote for that libertarian.
I will mention that for the first time this year, the Oklahoma Libertarian Party had an entry in the Martin Luther King Day parade here in Oklahoma City, which I think relates to that. Moving on to our next question here. Libertarians spend most of their time talking about what government does poorly, if not arguing that they shouldn't be doing it at all. What is an example of an activity of the federal government of which you approve? Mr. Hornberger, 2 minutes.
Of the federal government?
Yes.
Well, I think our judicial system is really a model for the world, despite all the abuses that take place. But what they brought into existence, the framers, with the Bill of Rights, trial by jury, due process of law, right to counsel, is really a remarkable system. And I would say that's what I would say is the best thing the federal government does, especially in civil trials. Now, I was a trial attorney for 12 years, and I practiced law in both the federal and the state system. And what was one of the things that I found so fascinating, that we all take for granted, is that when the loser in a civil suit, after all appeals and stuff, I've never heard of one instance where the loser goes and kills the winner. You know, it's just like people have come to accept that, oh, this is a judicial system that's going to resolve disputes, and we're going to live with that. Now, having said that, I will tell you, having practiced law on the border, that the federal courts are clogged with immigration cases and drug cases, which delays civil litigation, because those get the priority. And there's an old adage in the law, justice delayed is justice denied. If you get rid of this dysfunctional drug war in the immigration system, now all of a sudden you got federal judges that are able to do what they should be doing. And let me, if I just could add on the state level, it's pretty much a state level also with these drug cases. And the purpose of the state is to protect us from violent criminals, to go after the violent criminals. You get rid of the drug war, and all of a sudden you've got the state focusing on what it should do. And that is go after the burglars, the murderers, the rapists, the thieves, and leaving all the peaceful people alone, despite the fact that they're addicted to drugs or addicted to gambling or whatever. Those are matters that should be left to the caring, compassion, and therapy of the American people. They don't belong in the criminal justice system.
Same question to you, Mr. Oliver. 2 minutes. Do you need to hear that again?
So I'm a minarchist. There's a few things that I think the government should legitimately do. One of those is protect us from sovereign invasion. That doesn't mean have a military that fights wars around the world. We need to end the military footprint in every continent that isn't the United States, or in every country that isn't America. But then the other thing, as Jacob mentioned, is our criminal justice system. We're supposed to have police that are supposed to investigate crime, arrest wrongdoers, and we're supposed to have courts to adjudicate disputes. But both of those systems are extremely broken at every step. It starts with ending qualified immunity, because as Jacob mentioned, in civil litigation, you should be able to get your day in court, and the process of qualified immunity removes the day in court for so many people when they feel they've been done wrong by police. And I believe that officers should carry liability insurance so that if they are found to be guilty in civil court, that money doesn't come out of the services of the rest of the city or the county, that comes out of that insurance policy. Because that's also a free market mechanism to keep bad cops off the beat. If they're bad too many times, they're uninsurable, they can't be cops anymore, and that's probably a good thing. It probably makes both the police officer and our community safer. And when we talk about things like mandatory minimums that tie the hands of judges, that force them to put people in jail for decades sometimes, when, depending on the circumstances of the case, that should maybe be the case sometimes. So when we're talking about even when we interact with police, when we interact with our courts, and then even when we see the treatment of people in jail. Jail is supposed to be about restoring people, reforming them, not punishing them. And what we do too many times is we perpetuate a cycle of trauma that continues to have people cycling in and out of jail. And our drug war is a perfect example of that. If you're an addict and you get sent to jail and you get sent there for a year, you're completely traumatized by violence and horrible conditions. Well, what happens when you get out of there? You go for the first thing that's going to alleviate that trauma as an addict, and that means you reuse again, you get caught again, you get thrown again. And we have to stop putting people into the spokes and the wheels of the machine that throw people's lives away. And so while I support, and I do believe our justice system is the crown jewel of the world, there are so many reforms that we have to fix at every level. And I want to be a voice for that.
Let's see. Moving on to the next question here. What are your thoughts specifically on executive overreach at the federal level? And what steps would you like to see taken to address this? Mr. Oliver, 2 minutes.
If you don't see executive overreach from the office of the president, you're blind. And that starts with all the executive orders that are extra constitutional, that are not legal. If I were president, the first promise that I'm going to make is the office of president will be weaker the day that I leave it than the day that I enter. And that's because I'm going to stop taking Congress's job away from them. Far too long, for generations now, the executive branch has watched Congress just completely absolve themselves of their duty. They don't pass budgets, they don't pass real legislation, they don't declare war, but yet we're at war. How does that happen? Because the executive takes it upon itself to take that authority. We need to relinquish that authority back to our legislature and demand that they do their job. And then there's lots of things we can do as an executive to reduce the power of the federal government in our lives. And I say that starts with demanding a balanced budget. If they don't submit a balanced budget, you veto it. And if Congress overrides that, make sure that every single person knows that debt and deficit that's being put on our children and grandchildren was done by them, not you. And it holds Congress accountable to actually do their job. But yeah, there are so many examples of executive abuse in my entire life. Just look at the way that the Department of Homeland Security is set up. That department shouldn't exist. It's a complete abuse of people's privacy rights, and all in the name of national security. And so there's a lot of things we can do to reduce executive overreach. But I can tell you right now, the office of president, when a libertarian gets elected, begins getting weakened on day one. And that's something I commit myself to.
All right, same question to you, Mr. Hornberger. Do you need to hear that again?
No, it's fine. Technically, the national security establishment, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA, which is really one giant military establishment divided into three wings, falls under the executive branch. But it has become so powerful since it was brought into existence in 1947 that it really qualifies as a separate branch. And it is my conviction that it is this part of the government that's running the show, not the president, and especially in foreign affairs. And I'm not the only one who says this. There's a law professor at Tufts University named Michael Glennon, who served as counsel to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who a couple of years ago published a book called National Security and Double Government, which I wish every American would read. And his thesis, to which I subscribe, is it is the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA that are in charge. And the president defers to their judgment, especially on foreign affairs. They're the ones that decide NATO moving eastward toward Ukraine to gin up that crisis. They're the ones that decide the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, not the president. That's why there's no declaration of war, as the Constitution requires, because the Supreme Court and the Congress and the president do not dare take on these people. And that's why I continue to say this is one of my top priorities in this campaign, is to talk about this killing machine, because it really is the root of the problem in this country. You cannot, if we're going to talk about freedom, there is no way anybody can legitimately be considered free when you live under a governmental regime that wields and exercises totalitarian powers. And that's the real big overreach that I think we need to be concentrating on in this country.
All right, so the next question kind of follows on to that, but rather than focusing on what we don't like, it's more about what you would like. Foreign policy is primarily the purview of the president. What do you believe should be the guiding principles of U.S. foreign policy? Mr. Hornberger, 2 minutes.
Well, one of the greatest speeches I've ever read in my entire life, and I highly recommend it if you ever read the speech, is by John Quincy Adams. His 4th of July address in 1821 to the members of Congress. It's called In Search of Monsters to Destroy. Remarkable, beautiful speech. And in that speech, Adams outlines the founding foreign policy of America, which I believe needs to be restored. A policy of non-interventionism in the affairs of other countries. Bring all the troops home. Abandon all the foreign military bases, 800 of them or whatever. And then restore this principle of a limited government republic. And Adams says that if America were ever to abandon this philosophy, which we obviously have, we've become the world's policeman, intervener, killer, that he said America will inevitably acquire the attributes of dictatorship. He says America will be a dictatress, he called it. And who could deny that that's what's happened in this country? Now, we've seen oppositions to these forever wars. Vietnam, where they killed 58,000 of my generation in the Vietnam War, including some of my schoolmates at Virginia Military Institute. But notice that after every one ends, they've got a new one. And that, again, takes us back to the national security establishment. There was a senator named Frank Church in the 1960s that was a fierce opponent of the Vietnam War. He was in charge of the Church Committee that uncovered all the CIA assassinations. And Church said, it's not enough to get out of Vietnam. If we don't get rid of the national security state, we will live in a society of perpetual war. And so, when I was a kid, I learned that if you want to get rid of weeds in your yard, you got to pull them out by the root. You can't just trim the branches. And the root of this is that national security state.
All right, Mr. Oliver, same question to you. Do you need to hear that again? All right, 2 minutes.
So our foreign policy should be rooted in our interactions and peaceful interactions with our international neighbors. And that does require dismantling the warfare state that we've seen certainly my entire life and has been put on steroids since 9/11. How would we feel? How would we feel if there was a code developer in San Francisco that the nation of China didn't like, and they said, well, they're committing violence against our nation, so we just drone bombed them. We just drone bombed them, and it killed not only him, but it killed 5 of his neighbors, three kids in the area. How would we react? How would we feel? That's what we do in the Middle East every single day. That's what our foreign policy does every single day. We export death across this country, or across the world. And that's what we've done with our drone policy. So we need an absolute reversal of this. And if I'm President of the United States, we are not going to have a foreign policy that's rooted in our strength and the ability to kill people in an instant. We need to change our foreign policy to one that is rooted in free markets, free trade, and cooperation with other nations. Because here's the truth. If you're trading with somebody, you're not liable to shoot them. And if you're buying from someone, you're not liable to shoot them either. And that's how we can really get ourselves to a more peaceful world. Tear down the walls of trade that exist and have true free market, free trade across the world. And in doing so, also remove our military footprint from everywhere that is the United States of America. Because none of the violence that we have done around the world has been justified. Certainly not since my lifetime. And so if we want to stop killing innocent people around the world, we have to change our foreign policy objectives to one of peace, trade, and cooperation, instead of death, destruction, and violence.
All right, so one other question on the role of the president. The president is perceived as having a great deal of control over the economy. Do you consider that perception accurate? And to the degree that the economy may be influenced by the president, what sort of approach would you favor? Mr. Oliver?
Unfortunately, the government has way too much of a hand in the economy, and that does include the presidency. Now, I don't think that's a good thing. I think that's actually a bad thing, because when central planners and bureaucrats insert themselves in the free market, they create shortfalls, inefficiencies, and all sorts of problems. And so we need to actually decouple our government from our economy. We need to remove the executive and the legislative branch as much as possible from free trade and free cooperation amongst people. There should be basic rules of the road, contract, and the ability to adjudicate disputes are courts. But outside of that, business should be left to people wanting to do the business, and not some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. who's going to determine, well, this is the X must meet Y, so we have to do this and we have to do that. We're going to turn these levers and push these buttons. No. Remove all of that extra layer, because what that does is it makes things more expensive, it makes things less efficient, and it really leads to bad economic times. This is what has led to every major recession. The boom and bust economy that we see is due to the direct intervention of our government into the Federal Reserve into our economy. And so the quicker we can remove ourselves from this and get it where the president doesn't involve himself in our economy, the healthier our economy will be. But right now, unfortunately, it is horrible. And and unfortunately, much of what the government does can determine how successful our economy is. But here's the good news. In spite of all the horrible things government's done, in spite of all the inefficiencies, we still have the strongest economy in the world. And because broadly speaking, though there are many, many problems, we are still the closest to a free market of many of the nations in the world. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. But we should be seen as a model to the world in terms of a free market economy, and we're straying further and further away from that.
All right. Same question to you, Mr. Hornberger. Do you need to hear that again?
No, I'm fine. I think the role of the president in the economy is exaggerated. What's really going on here is the Federal Reserve. It's their printing press that gets the artificial boom going that the president then takes credit for. He's a better manager of the economy. And then, or the recession, let's blame Biden for the recession. And so what you end up having is Biden is hoping that the Fed lowers interest rates very quickly to get this another boost of prosperity. The Republicans are hoping for a recession so they can blame Biden for not managing the economy. The real question Americans need to be asking, and what we can bring to this campaign, is what in the world does government have to do with managing the economy anyway? Why is government doing this? You know, back in 1776, the year of the Declaration, a Scottish philosopher named Adam Smith wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. Prior to that, governments had managed economic activity through the centuries, and there was mass poverty, starvation. Smith says, stop governments from managing economic activity and watch the standard of living soar. That was the beginning of free enterprise. Enterprise, it was free of government control, and Americans adopted that. There were terrific exceptions, slavery and so forth, but for much of the population, enterprise was totally free of government control throughout the 1800s. By the time 1870 to 1910 comes along, it was incredible. You had this period of massive growth in the economy. People were going from rags to riches. Millions of immigrants were flooded into American shores. The most voluntary charity nation that has ever been seen in history. It's that principle that we libertarians need to take to the American people. Restoring the real principles of free enterprise. Enterprise that is free from government control and management.
All right, we're getting down to the last couple of questions here. This is a good one, I think. The likely nominees of the establishment parties consist of two individuals who have spent all of their lengthy adult lives as members of the wealthy and or political elite. Without dwelling on them, how are you better able to identify with the typical Oklahoman who will be able to vote in the primary here on March 5th? Mr. Hornberger, 2 minutes.
Well, I grew up on a farm on the Rio Grande. I was fortunate. My dad was a lawyer. We were a middle-class family, but he put us to work. My brothers and I mean, we worked out in the fields baling hay with the illegal immigrants we hired on our farm. They were the hardest working people I've ever seen until the Border Patrol would come onto our farm without a warrant, which they were entitled to do, and bust our workers and cart them away. But border culture, a lot of people don't realize this, is totally different from everywhere in the United States, including Dallas and Oklahoma City. The poverty in border towns would shock me when I was a kid. I'd go into Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, and I just was stunned. And so that had a big impact on me, seeing this mass poverty, and I couldn't figure it out. Why are people on one side of the river poorer than others on the other side? And it bothered me until I discovered libertarianism. And I figured out why some nations are wealthier than other nations. It's this idea of free enterprise. But I grew up relating to the poor and trying to figure out, I was a Democrat too. I believed that government should be helping the poor. I couldn't believe anybody would object to that. And then I discovered libertarianism, and everything, my whole life changed, everything. And so that's, if there's Oklahomans here that are struggling, trying to make ends meet, paycheck to paycheck, going into debt to pay kids' college, I'm with you. I relate to you. And so I think that's what I bring to a race like this, is just my particular background in terms of where I grew up and how I grew up.
Mr. Oliver, same question. Do you need to hear that again?
So what separates kind of my life experience from that of the political elites? I could go on all day about this, but I grew up in a middle-class family with loving parents. My dad was a salesman. My mom worked all kinds of jobs. Mostly she was an accountant when I was a kid. And I have a life experience that is probably vastly different from that of who grew up in major amounts of privilege, because I've seen the struggles with my own eyes. I've seen parents wondering how they're going to be able to feed their kids or pay for the rent. I've counseled people who have been suffering from addiction and seen how that can wreck their lives and how they fear getting help because of the stigma of addiction in this country. I have worked and marched alongside those who oppose the warfare state because they're tired of seeing their friends go off to go fight a war and come back changed people. So it's that kind of insight that I think we need to have in a candidate for president. Somebody who can connect with the average American, because I am the average American. I spent over a decade of my life working in restaurants. I got started as a dishwasher, probably the lowest of the low job you can have in a restaurant. And I worked my way through up to where I was actually running restaurants by the time I left. And then I got my job in logistics, and I saw how interconnected our markets are. And it gave me newfound respect for a lot of workers that we had here in Oklahoma, folks like truckers and rail workers who bring our goods to market. It's that kind of insight. As I travel across the country, I've spoken to thousands of people, and I've heard thousands of stories that I carry with me in my heart. That makes me know that we can have a better country if only we had more freedom for people to make choices for themselves and take power out of the hands of a government that's abusive to them. And that's what informs me as a candidate. I carry their stories in my heart and on my back. There was a young woman in Idaho who I spoke to. She had birth defects from depleted uranium. She was worried about those effects being brought on the children of Ukraine. And 2 days later, she had surgery and lost her voice. She can't speak anymore. but I got to hear that story, and now I'm going to tell that story across the country. That's the kind of values that separate us from the political elites.
All right, and now we'll get to our final question. This is similar to the last one, but I think a little bit trickier. As mentioned previously, there are several other candidates for the Libertarian presidential nomination who are not on our primary ballot. Without dwelling on that, that's the tricky part, what makes you the best choice to be nominated? Mr. Oliver, 2 minutes.
Actually not tricky at all, because I've made it a matter of my campaign to really not negatively campaign about the other libertarians in this race, because there are great libertarians in this race. One of us will be the nominee, and I'm not going to do the mainstream media's dirty work for them. But what I can talk about is my campaign. I'm so proud of my campaign. That's what does separate me. It's not just me as a person, it's an awesome campaign team. I have hundreds of volunteers who get active whenever we need it, whenever we need something done. We sent 40,000 text messages to earn ourselves a spot in the free and equal debate stage that's happening later this month. We have an awesome media team that goes out there and they make sure that anytime I'm traveling, every single media outlet in that state or locality knows that I'm going to be there. And that's how we've earned more media than any other candidates in this race. We have an amazing donor network and fundraising support network that has allowed us to get more donations from than any other candidate. We've traveled more miles. We've gotten more media hits. The metrics are speaking for itself in this campaign. We're firing on all cylinders. And part of that is I've been a candidate before. I know the discipline it takes to be a candidate and run a whirlwind campaign, and I absolutely know my campaign can punch above its weight. Because when I ran for Senate, on $20,000, I forced a runoff in a race that my opponent spent $250 million. And so I can tell you right now, with the limited resources we're going to have running against the two-party system, my campaign is ready to go on day one, ready to get active, and ready to be active in all 50 states to earn votes for the Libertarian Party. And so I'm happy to be sharing the field with lots of great candidates, and they all bring something to the table. But what I think we bring to the table is the total package of what a campaign can be to really be effective in 2024 and beyond. And so I don't just speak about myself, because there's so many great people, from my comms director, my media director, my campaign manager, all the team, the text bankers and the phone bankers. They are what builds a campaign. I just happen to be the name that's on the tin. And I'm so proud of the Chase Oliver for President campaign, and I hope each and every one of you can be a part of it too.
Mr. Hornberger, the same question to you. Do you need to hear that again?
No, I'm fine.
All right, 2 minutes.
For me, principles are everything that matters. And the core principle of the libertarian philosophy is what is called the non-aggression principle. That we will not ever support the initiation of force or fraud against others. We even have a pledge to that effect in this party. And, you know, we're all libertarians. We're in the same party, and we're all friends in this campaign. But there is significant differences in this campaign. For example, you've heard me call for the dismantling of these socialist programs immediately, and a restoration of faith and freedom with Social Security. My opponents in this race, including Chase, want to continue Social Security for at least 25 years, for at least one generation, because they say that people will die in the streets. And I challenge that. You've got children and grandchildren, especially no longer having to pay income taxes and FICA taxes, that would honor mother and father on a voluntary basis, no doubt in my mind. Church groups filled with faith-filled people, charitable groups that would come to the assistance of people in need. And that's the faith and freedom we need to restore in this nation, as compared to the faith in the coercive apparatus of government for the next 25 years. You look at this educational system. I say we make the case for separating school and state the same way our ancestors made the case for separating church and state. But my opponents, including Chase, want to impose a system of school vouchers to reform and improve the public school system. Both of these programs and more violate our core principle, the non-aggression principle, because they're based on taxation, taken from one person and given to another person. It is my conviction that if you go to the American people with violations of your own core principle, you're going to have a difficult time maintaining credibility. If we're going to lead this country out of this morass, we need to maintain our principles.
Mr. Oliver, Mr. Hornberger referred to you a couple of times in that. If you would like, I will give you 30 seconds for rebuttal, if you would like.
So I'm an anarchist. I would love for government to be fully voluntarily funding it, or not government, but people to voluntarily fund education. As a candidate for president, I recommend completely dismantling the Department of Education and returning that back to the states. And while I would advocate returning ourselves back to a voluntarily funded education system, I recognize that that's not the choice every state's going to make. And I've always said that as opposed to funding a school system, if they were to fund a student, that would be preferable, but not the ideal. And my plan on Social Security is simple. I want to end Social Security quickly. But that requires those who are at or near retirement to be able to retire like my parents and grandparents. I know millennials like myself can't just out of the blue fund their parents immediately. So I believe we have to have a transitional plan that gets us off it. But I want this to be the last generation for Social Security.
Yeah, that's your 30 seconds there. Jacob, Mr. Hornberger, do you have, I'll give you 30 seconds of rebuttal if you would like, if you think there's anything to add to that.
No, there's nothing.
Oh, thank you then. And now we will go to our closing statements. The candidate who went first, again going first, so the other fellow gets the last word. So, Mr. Hornberger, 3 minutes for a closing statement.
Thank you again, Chris, for the phenomenal job you've done putting this whole thing together in the primaries. And thank you again to Rose State University, and thank you all for coming. Appreciate you being here. You know, when you're feeling out of sorts as a person, you sometimes say, you know, I got to just stop and I need to take stock of my life, figure out what's going on here to get my life back on track again. And I think the same thing applies to a nation. That I think this is a time for every American to engage in some serious soul searching about where we are as a country, how we got here, and what we need to do to get things back on the right track. And that entails going back to first principles. We know that there were some bad founding principles in this country: slavery, violation of women's rights, but there were some good founding principles. And it is my conviction that we need to restore the good founding principles and build on them. Dismantle the national security state. Restore our founding governmental system of a limited government republic. Get rid of all the immigration controls. We had open immigration here for more than 100 years. It was the most remarkable system in history. Dismantle the socialist programs. We shouldn't be putting our faith in socialism. That's what public schooling is. That's what Social Security, Medicare. We need to restore that faith in freedom. Get rid of the drug war. Legalize all drugs. Restore sound money. Our country started with gold and silver coins. That's the official money in the Constitution. We can do better than that. We can have a separation of money in the state. A free enterprise system, our founding economic system. Gun rights. Gun rights are the linchpin of a free society. And separate school and state entirely. Reject all kinds of reform measures, because this is a system that is not worth reforming or saving, but freedom is. It is my conviction that this party has the ability to lead America to freedom. That's our job, to lead America to freedom. But I think we can only do so by adhering strictly to our principles. We adhere to our principles, and I have no doubt that we can ignite a revolution for freedom out there. It is my belief that we can lead America to the highest reaches of freedom, peace, prosperity, and harmony in the history of mankind. And it is with that aim that I seek this party's nomination. Thank you very much.
Mr. Oliver, your closing statement. You have 3 minutes.
First, I want to say thank you for you moderating, and thank you for coming out here at Rose State College. It's been a pleasure to speak with Jacob and have this forum. I want to be our candidate for president because I believe it's time that people who are sick and tired of being sick and tired have a choice they feel good about voting for in the ballot box. I see the 68% of Americans who said in the poll that Trump versus Biden is a rematch they don't want to see, and they want to see other options. And that is a golden opportunity for our party to push ourselves forward and break through into the mainstream of political consciousness. But we need an energetic campaign that's able to do that. And I'm somebody who's been a practice campaigner. I ran this race for U.S. Senate in 2022 in Georgia up against the most highly funded opponents ever in the history of U.S. Senate race. And I forced a runoff, and I forced millions of people to see on their television that night a Libertarian on their TV screen. I want to make sure we're doing that in every state across the country, that we're having impact. that we're pushing our ideas out there, that we're shifting the Overton window of political opinion towards liberty and freedom by putting great ideas and great policy forward that is workable, that can actually pass through our legislatures and sign into law. Why do I want to do that? Well, on the off chance that we win, I want to have a great blueprint for us to go. But if we don't win, I would like it if maybe, just maybe, we had such attractive ideas that the mainstream parties started to steal them from us. Because that's another way we win, is when we show that the principles of liberty are so attractive that to prevent our growth, Republicans or Democrats start adopting libertarian principles. Maybe that's a fantasy world. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be fighting those principles in mind and holding them up high as a stand for each and every person to see. Because we have to be loud, we have to be boisterous, we have to fight for the freedom of each and every person, regardless of who they are. I don't care where you came from, how you worship, who you love. If you're doing it in peace, I am your ally. I am your supporter, even if it's not the way I love, the way I worship, or the way I live my life. Because you are owed the same freedom that I fight for myself. And that is the commitment that I will make as a candidate for President of the United States, to put our principles forward and to wake up millions of new Americans to the fact that the Libertarian Party is here, we're here to stay, and we're not going anywhere, we're going to keep fighting for your freedom. I urge you to join my campaign. You can text my name, Chase, to 21,000 right now to get involved in the campaign, or you can visit votechaseoliver.com to find all sorts of resources to share with people, to share this liberty message across the country. And I hope to see each and every one of you on your primary day on Super Tuesday, and I hope to earn your vote. Thank you very much.